We'll do that. Thank you. We have two committees. Anyway, well, it's 9. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got some folks on the line, and maybe it would be a good place to start with that roll call. Sherry, are you able to help us with that?
I can. For the Budget Committee, Mayor Grandy.
I'm here.
Commissioner Wheeler.
Here.
Commissioner Malone.
Here.
Commissioner England. Commissioner Light. We have 3 members present for Budget Committee, 2 absent. For the HEW Committee, Chairman Edens.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Matherly. We have 3 members of HEW present and 2 absent. Steve Light would be the other member of HEW.
Okay, very good. For reference, we have Chairman Edens with Mr. France, and they're in the zoning conference room downstairs. And for those that are not visually in. Okay, so we'll determine this to be an essential function of our governing body as we work diligently to create a structure around our zoning for environmental court. And so if I might have a motion for that declaration, I would appreciate it.
So moved.
I so move, or second, whatever.
Okay, we'll give that motion to Commissioner Wheeler and the second to Commissioner Williams. Let's see, let's go ahead and just have a roll call vote on that acceptance.
Mayor Grandy.
Yes.
Commissioner Wheeler.
Yes.
Commissioner Malone.
Yes.
Chairman Edens.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Commissioner Jones.
Yes.
6 yes.
Okay, great. So in getting going today, there's 3 or 4 areas of issue that I think we're going to maybe be taking a look at and trying to work through a little bit. The first one of those is process, just generally how this works from the time that we get a complaint or a request for a site to be looked at.
Willie.
Join the meeting.
Okay. Next is, how the HEW committee might engage in that process. Another would be function around what happens in the court and legal structure, and then of course generally in the finances, how we manage to pay for the cleanups, how we lien those assessed charges and ultimately collect them. So anyway, that's just some framework around it. Thought maybe we might start with Mr. France. Bobby, you've made a plea to the Budget Committee on the 19th of June that the Budget Committee has heard, but I don't think HEW had the privilege of that. So, in 5 or 10 minutes, can you just talk to us a little bit about your vision of how this might work and what it's going to take to accomplish it?
Yes, sir, thank you, Mike. What I'm looking at, and I guess I didn't make myself clear during the budget meeting, I guess, wandered around. But the thing of it is I'm needing somebody to help me out in the field to help do inspections, and I'm also needing somebody more stationary, which would be an administrative assistant in the office. And that would be to at least, when people call into the office, this person knows about what is going on out in the field, because I'm having to always go back to her, relate to who it is, what they're asking. And at times they'll be, she'll contact me out in the field, and I will actually go to the site if they so need me there. This person, the administrative assistant, will be doing different types of functions, staying up with the courts, scheduling, setting up meetings, doing a lot of clerical work. And then the other person I'll be training, if they don't already know the position out in the field, I will be training them, and also I want to stay out in the field to help myself. So that way the one or two people, however y'all filed in, the two people can always call in and say, hey, we're at so-and-so site, give an address, and possibly start a file then. And then when we come in, we'll download the pictures, send them a letter, and that type of situation. It's just a lot involved. It's time consuming. We're constantly having to try to find people. But, that's about all I can tell you right now. It's not a one-man job. And I know the legal department, I already know that they're already strapped as it is. But, if I can get a lot of the work done, the clerical side of things, so I can get it up to legal, I think it'd be beneficial for both parties.
All right, somebody have any questions with respect to that vision?
Well, that seemed to concentrate on the staffing side, and maybe even related to that, if the staffing were what Mr. France liked. I still am confused, I guess, about the whole process from soup to nuts, start to finish, because certainly in the past, I think, at least my understanding, oftentimes these things went to court. We would get judgment against people before any of the commissioners, maybe specifically HEW, knew anything about the situation. And so in that instance, we had already decided to spend thousands of dollars, if on nothing but legal expenses, before any of the commissioners were involved. And so I think I understand the way it was working in the past, where at some point things seem to get off track. What I'm maybe not understanding or not hearing, I hear the staffing needs, also understand the budget limitations, but I'm not sure I understand either what is the current or what is the proposed process about how we want it to work. We get a call from out in the field. Here's a complaint. Here's a problem. Mr. France goes out and investigates. We do some paperwork. What is the process? What are we proposing would happen from that point forward? And again, I know Mr. France handles, some significant percentage of these on his own before it ever gets escalated. But I guess all I heard was about staffing and not the process. And maybe that's what we're here to talk about today.
That is probably one of the primary purposes. Bobby, maybe you ought to talk about that, because one of the things that you've indicated to us over time is that 60 or 70% of these cleanup cases that are called in by complaint or whatever, you're able to resolve in the field by either, meeting with the owners, discussing it, and getting a resolution that way, or sending a letter to them, and that sort of thing. So maybe that would be helpful, just to sort of describe how the process works from the time a call comes in about a complaint to, resolution prior to it going to court.
Well, prior to going to court, as well, I do go out, I investigate the complaint, I do send them a notice of violation letter if there is a problem there. Then from there, I usually allow at least some time to try to clear up the process. Now, every situation is kind of different. Sometimes you can find these people, sometimes you can't find people. You're constantly digging, trying to find people. Well, in the meantime, while you're trying to find stuff, you've got other stuff coming in. So it never stops. And, you know, the person that I always call centralized or centralized is the administrative assistant. And she'll never, or he, whatever, they will never be able to stop doing what they're doing because it's just going to overwhelm them. That's why I need help. Can I ask Mr. Wheeler a question, please?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wheeler, or Commissioner Wheeler, you're a paralegal or your administrative assistant. How much do you depend on that person?
Well, we're not doing any sessions court work, I should point out first, but any attorney depends a lot on their legal assistant. But the type of work we're doing is I'm not saying it's just comparing apples and oranges, because it's not, you know, I do relatively little courtroom work. Most of my work is document preparation and that type of thing. But I understand where you're, you know, do you have any figures on the volume, the number of calls that you get, the number of cases that you're dealing with before, you know, that result in you going out? Are there any figures on any of that at this point? And I realize you may not have had any need to keep those records.
Right. Right now, there's about, I'm going to say around 60 active. I've actually got some new ones and I actually got some old ones. And where this coronavirus thing came in is kind of put everything jammed up in the court system. And I have recently talked to some of the constables. I have 4 or 5 places that's requiring eviction. But with this coronavirus thing, you know, I don't know if they can't just serve them, or if it's the federal thing, or, you know, they can't evict people just because they can't.
They can't, right. And I don't know if that's ended yet. I don't think it has, but there was a moratorium on evictions.
Jim, just for reference, I've asked Mr. France to, you know, compile the stuff that's active, which he has done, and it's really helpful to us. There's on our list, there's 45 active cases that essentially is a year to date, a calendar year to date, and another few. Yeah, there we go. So that's you know, they're not exactly chronological. I've asked him to send it to Sherry, and we'll go ahead and probably resort these in chronological order. But as you can see, most of them have had at least a letter sent to the property. Some of them have, you know, been in court, and then when you get to the second page, you know, those are ones that really are just sort of June to current, or, you know, very, very new. So that's sort of where we are. And I don't think this includes any of the ones, by the way, that the HEW and Budget Committee have reviewed in the past that, you know, have sort of been deferred by the Budget Committee. Would that be true, Bobby? Did I mischaracterize that? The ones that the Budget Committee has already seen that have been through the court are not on this list.
There are several that's not on that list, but I didn't get them done in time to put them on the list, but I'm still working on it. There's probably 12 to 15, and I'm going to say about 4, maybe 5 of them have been to court, but we haven't really got to go to court on them. They were scheduled to go to court before the coronavirus came in.
Yeah, so with our current status, the process is sort of like this. Between Tabitha and Sherry, we're trying to provide that internal backup. That is, when McCall comes in, there's actually a manual that has the procedure for this environmental stuff, and there's a couple of pages of sort of here's what happens, and then the majority of it is core documents and other exhibits that are letters. But one of them is a complaint report. So when a complaint comes into the office, if we can get it in Tabitha's hands, she'll fill this out, and then it goes onto this report as kind of a work report for Bobby, and he can get out. And so, the procedure defines the first thing he does is go out there and inspect the site, be sure that the complaint's legitimate, maybe take a few pictures, and then, of course, after that, the follow-up is, trying to get with the person there and so forth. Bobby, you might just describe how many times you're dealing with actual property owners versus renters, and then other times it's just vacant property and it's trying to track down the owner. So there is some research and other work that has to go into it. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct. Most of the time, I just deal with the property owner. I don't deal with the tenants. It's up to them to either evict them or get them to clean up the property for them. Then you've got the ones that either are being foreclosed on, let the property is abandoned. You've got the ones that maybe have filed bankruptcy and abandoned the property. But then again, there's ones that still own the property that's moved off to another state, but they still own the property. And then you have to do the research to try to find these people outside the state. So you're constantly digging for these people.
Let me ask this: if you can't find somebody, I mean, there's always an owner of record in the tax rolls, and that's are there occasions when somebody's not available that we just move forward with the owner on the tax rolls and get it on into court? You're not going to taking any of them to Chancery Court at this point, right?
No, sir, just sessions.
Okay. And the problem with doing that in sessions, in my view, is that we don't have somebody that we can look to pay for it. But in Chancery, the Chancery Court would serve the person that's the owner of record in the tax rolls. If they're paying their taxes, then that address is usually correct. So, I guess what I would envision is that we would get the person on the tax roll served and then get them ordered to clean it up, or eventually get an order for us to clean it up and them to pay for it. But that's where I think tying it to the taxes makes more sense than perhaps some of the struggling that we're doing now. I know you have the same problem when you have a mortgage company, but
Right.
When there's been a foreclosure. But again, somebody's on there as the owner of the tax roll. If a lot of times these mortgage companies, when they buy it at foreclosure, they won't have a deed put down, so there's no way to find out who the bank that bought it is, the corporate entity. But again, there's an owner on the tax rolls. If they don't pay those taxes and you go by that, then you eventually you get them because they've either failed to pay the taxes or failed to pay your lien if you treat it, if you file it as a tax lien. Or not as a tax lien, but with the tax lien.
I've got a situation down in Palm Branch. People living there, the bank foreclosed on them, and it's kind of changed hands back to the bank. Well, the bank can't do anything with them because they're trying to get them evicted. They don't want to pay, what they owe on it, and they're offering them to do that, but they already know that they're not going to pay the amount that they're looking for. So they're trying to get them evicted, but they can't get them evicted, of course, because of this situation with federal. And they've told me, they'll be glad to clean it up, but they can't clean it up until the people's evicted and off the property. And
On the list that we're looking at, we have an address and we have an owner's name for every single one of them already. So are these owners living in these structures? Or are these owners someplace else? I did happen to see Ben Padik's name on there, so I presume that's a rental, but I mean, are these folks local? Can we find them?
some of them are, some like the Stand Up Trust, they're I think out of Arizona. The Southern Finance was out of Kingsport and actually got them to go ahead and comply. I'm trying to find the ones that's on there. And the ones that may not be on there, the ones I just recently, I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, the Ralph Martin ones are in the process of being cleaned up. You can just keep them on there and keep an eye out for them, but those are, that's in the estate is being handled by Mark Edmonds, and they're in the process, those folks are in the process of being removed from the structures, and the structures themselves will be removed as well. That will not be borne by a county expense.
And also there's a possibility that we may have 3 or 4 of these files that's going to be on contempt. One of them is the Philip Robinson on Upper Sand Valley Road. One of them is Justin Cannon on Buttermilk. There's 2 more. Okay. Oh, the Melissa and Jason Shipley. The county went out there and cleaned this property up, left it immaculate on Old Stage Road. Of course, now I've probably got, I don't know, anywhere 10 complaints back on this property. And at that time, Mr. Shipley, they're in a custody battle of some sort. And Mr. Shipley went ahead and he was taken to death. The county come out there and cleaned the property up and went ahead and paid what he owed on it. But since then, Mr. Shipley said that, he was going to buy a new lawnmower and all this stuff to bring his property, keep it in compliance. But he hasn't, and it's now about 3 foot tall, and I've got people just wearing me out on the phone. Hey, what are you going to do about it? Well, I have to go by what, the HEW and the budget determine on how we want to handle this.
When you say they're going to be in contempt of court, I don't understand that, because I didn't think the Sessions Court could issue a permanent injunction.
Well, I'm not sure about the permanent injunction. We've never actually filed a contempt, but this was within a 6-month time that they turned right around and went into another violation.
Well, unless the court can issue a permanent injunction, which would be moving forward, which the Chancery Court I know can do. I thought the Sessions Court could not do that. Ms. Wilkinson may know a little bit more about that than I do on these, whether there's some special authority given them, but I didn't think they could prescribe future conduct. That's where, my thought is, or at least under my current understanding of what they can and can't do, that would be one that I would suggest, if it's a repetitive violation, that Chancery Court could handle differently and could hold them in contempt if they don't keep the property clean.
Mr. Wheeler, that might be why Tom never did do contempt of court. You may be right. I don't know that side of the thing. That's all legal.
Commissioner Wheeler, I can confirm for you that the private act that created the environmental court does give to the Sessions Court the power to issue injunctions, the power to order a defendant found guilty of violating the environmental ordinances and resolutions to correct the violation at the defendant's expense, and the power to punish willful failure to obey orders through an established fine for contempt, which is $50, and imprisonment not exceeding 5 days for each such violation.
Okay, and then the question becomes to the individual judges, are they willing to, some judges will say you have to cite them for each $50. Other judges, and I think the law agrees with this, that they can fine them $50 a day till they come into compliance, but some judges will not do that.
I agree with you, Commissioner, that in enforcing that, it would create, a need for additional procedural steps there to make sure that everything was in front of the judge, because that is a quasi-criminal remedy, and courts are often very hesitant to apply that without a showing of disrespect and disregard, not only to the rule of law, but oftentimes to the court itself.
And I guess to bring this back to talking about staffing, a lot of the decisions we make about how we handle these in court affect how much staffing we need. I think we're spending a lot of time on some of these that, may just need to be going on through the court process, rather than, we're talking about, and this is a little different. When we talked before, Bobby, when you came to the budget committee, you talked about that you didn't necessarily need somebody on every site visit, that you did need somebody that could be available, that could go with you, and preferably somebody with some authority to stop somebody from harassing you or arrest somebody if necessary. And we talked a little bit about that it didn't necessarily need to be a full-time person. It was my understanding at the budget committee, at least, which makes a huge difference from the budget committee standpoint. But, even with the idea of the clerical help, we're making some decisions about how we handle these people that is really driving up the need for the clerical help, because, it's really not our problem that somebody can't get somebody evicted. That's their problem. And we should not, in my opinion, be spending a lot of staff time dealing with their issue of getting somebody evicted. There are ways to move on forward in our process to get the property cleaned up. And that is, should not be something that county staff time is being spent on dealing with the private property owner's issue about a tenant. It's just my opinion. I don't think the rest of the taxpayers of the county should be paying for that.
And those are not costs that we have the opportunity to recoup either. So that's a good point. The more staff expense we put into this, the more the county responds up paying, and that is not going to be recoverable by lien.
And I don't mean that. I don't think Mr. France has been involved as much in the decision of what to do, which court to go to, or how to handle it in court. And I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying I think there's some things the county can do that will help Mr. France not have to spend so much time on the phone or dealing with folks that are really not county problems. The cleanup itself is a county problem. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm just saying that we're taking on some of the responsibility that's really the property owner.
I agree with that, but in my defense, the only thing that I feel like I can do until, the situation gets resolved is allow them time. And then once, they get the eviction notice, then that's their baby. That ain't got nothing to do with me. But I've done told these people, when I talk to people about eviction, like banks and stuff like that, I know they need time. I mean, it don't happen overnight. So I give them time. But I keep it on the books, and it's an open violation. In the meantime, I have told these people to contact me every 2 weeks and let me know what the status is. Don't go unresolved, because you'll wind up in court. And so that's what I've been doing, is allowing them time. And then I just go on to the next one.
It seems to me that, Mr. France, you had that big spreadsheet up and had said, like, a lot of these are different kinds of situations. There's a lot of variability, different kinds of problems come up with different cases. And we're just sitting here problem solving this one. and I think Commissioner Wheeler is giving good advice about this one. I don't know how many other kinds of advice we would come up with if we heard a bunch of other scenarios that you're dealing with, but that seems like that's the role the commission should play, is trying to make sure that county resources are handled appropriately across the gamut of different sorts of things that come up, when to choose to incur legal costs versus put it on our staffing. And that's where I feel like our county process for interfacing with environmental court has a real problem, because we don't get to hear about these cases in a manner that allows us to help you, Mr. France, think about those things and possibly in collaboration with other staff before they've already gone to court. So, I mean, I don't know if other people feel that way too, but it seems like this is a great case example of exactly what we need to be hearing about in HEW, for example, and thinking through. And I don't think we have, I definitely don't understand what, I feel like HEW could play a more active role in thinking these cases through, and I don't have a sense of what that is right now. How we could rearrange the process so that HEW can help make those decisions. And so one question I have is, after you sort of give some folks a letter, give them some time to do the cleanup, sort of maybe try to locate them, when would HEW get involved? When do our costly legal fees start to kick in for handling these things, and how can we more effectively arrange that order of events?
Well, the cost of the legal fees is actually when I do wind up in court. I do, well, clerically wise, clerical wise. Ms. Stoops is probably going to help me as far as citations, but I'm the one that has to put them in the window. Actually, the legal staff don't really get involved until 2 days prior to going to court. And that's when I sat down with Ms. Wilkinson there, and we'll discuss the situations that's in hand.
But Bobby, is it at the filing that we kind of get committed that we're going that route, right? When you file it in court? Yes, sir.
And a lot of times we mediated outside of the courtroom, but the attorney has to announce. So, then either if the judge hears it, he usually allows him some more time, but he's very stern with, his time frame. But if we do it outside the court, we also allow him some time. So we're not here trying to, take people's money.
Right.
Honestly, I don't even want to go to court. But when you've got people that don't want to do anything, that's the ones that usually winds up in court.
Commissioner Jones, excuse me, I beg your pardon, Bobby. Commissioner, to your question, I wanted to remind you, because this is your opportunity as commissioners addressing the rebuild, basically, of a program that has been in place in the county since 1998. And in 2014, there were some changes made to the process and the handling. And on your point specifically with legal, you were seeing matters come through. And I think I heard you as commissioners in HEW committee commenting that at one juncture you were not aware that there were legal fees outside of the staff in internal legal department. So in 2014, that change was made. And in 2014, there was a projected budget of approximately $6,000 a month when the outside counsel became the county attorney and environmental court was placed in a more senior lawyer's hands to manage. And then the staff attorney did not work on environmental court. This is in the memo, by the way, so just you don't have to write anything down. But there was a projected budget of 40 hours per month that would be legal fees. So when y'all were seeing those come through, and I don't know how the numbers added up, that's about a $6,000 a month legal fee based at the hourly billing rate that attorney negotiated with the county. And so what you have now, when you think of it going to court, is the commission has created a process by which there's no outside counsel. It would be handled by the county attorney. I'm the county attorney. I'm a salaried lawyer. I do not bill an additional hourly rate to go to court, to mediate, to prepare the complaint or anything else, to have the phone calls. So that cost you as a commission in approving the budget have already addressed. So I think you can set that aside as a cost, and you're really looking at the filing fees. So that is a cost that the county will carry with respect to legal expense. The county carries that until such time, for the filing, et cetera, and that would be recouped by the clerk. But and then the cleanup itself, and then the operations of Mr. France, which Mayor Grandy is addressing, and I believe he set up a department that you could see in the budget so that you could focus on that operational expense. And lastly, I'll just say, at HEW, I'm reminded of those posters that you used to see when they were building the trains across the West, and the tracks have to connect. And so think of the operations having to connect to legal, that there's an enforceable factual record and timeline. So Mr. France is really good at checking in. Teresa Stutes has a lot of experience with environmental court, even before she worked with the county. So she has that process. And what's important is that the operations link up in a way that when the county seeks intervention by the court, it can be supported by that record. So with that, I'll just remind you that legal expense has been addressed in the budget itself, and there's no additional legal fee like you were looking at in the past since 2014.
Thank you for that reminder. And I just want to say, I did read that memo. I even reread it before the meeting. Don't remember that part, but it was.
There's a lot of
I was going to start at the meeting by saying thank you for that recap, because it was really helpful, and particularly the review of all the cases that are outstanding and need to be dealt with. So it's all being handled by our own staff. And I appreciate the thought about operations connecting to legal. And then it seems like that connection would be where commissioner input maybe through HEW would be helpful. Or I don't know, do you have any thoughts about how our commission can be helpful to the process or guiding of the process? Because right now, the way HEW is positioned in the process, we're just checking something that's already gone through almost to its completion.
Well, I'll just address that from a legal point of view, that obviously you have a very seasoned county employee handling the operations, and he has structured and working with Mayor Grandy, that Mayor Grandy is now his direct report. So the commission, of course, does not direct employees. So from a legal point of view, I would want you to be mindful of that you would never, I'm sure, want to make it where a county employee was trying to, report to 15 commissioners or 1 commissioner or 5 commissioners or anything like that. So I think you would want that focus to remain in the operations side, so that Mr. France has that autonomy and you have the benefit of that experience. I will say that, consistent with the resolution setting it up, maybe the initiation of suit, because that does make another step. Just like if we the county were to sue anyone, I would come and present that before such a suit was filed. That might be that kind of process But I would really encourage you to think of your role as commissioners and that he is an employee, and maybe that bridge that you wouldn't want to blur that from a legal point of view.
But you could consider either, I understand what you're saying, and to make sure that we not keep it at a level where you got to have a legal degree to figure out what we're talking about. What you're saying is, though, with respect to the processes, you could pinpoint, and I think this is really what Commissioner Jones is looking for, is to pinpoint a point where you bring that case to HEW for determination of, do we move this into court or not, which could be at that point. Right now, it's more on the enforcement side, and it's even really not been coming to HEW from my sitting and watching HEW. It's not coming to HEW to say, do we clean this up or not? It's coming to HEW to say, we need you to approve. We've already we spent staff time getting the estimates. This is what it's going to cost, and moving it forward there. There's really not even a decision doesn't appear to me to be a decision about yes or no, is this one the county should clean up? Because we really haven't been given the option of saying, yes, we'll clean this up, or no, we're gonna approach this differently, take it to Chancery Court and force the owner to clean it up, which may take more time. That's where I think, at least at that point, you ought to be making some decisions, but perhaps even back at the point when we're deciding whether we're going to spend staff time to go to court on it.
And that is consistent with the 1998 resolution that established the environmental court, or adopted the statutory authority to enforce environmental issues. So, and I'm happy to share that resolution, because I think it is contemplated that HEW is the reporting committee, and that it does talk about initiation of litigation.
Well, may I something?
Commissioner
Hello?
Williams, yes, go ahead.
My experience with HEW for these last 3 years is we're only informed when it either has been to court or there's a suggestion of going on and cleaning it up and charging the owner. Prior to that, we're not involved. Is that correct?
That's the way it's been. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so do we need to initiate a prior involvement to help Mr. France or the owners, not necessarily the owners, but the neighbors who are so frustrated? Did I lose you?
Bobby, is that something that you feel like you can address?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't really understand her question.
Mr. Williams, would you restate that, please? Thank you.
All right. My experience is when environmental court report has been made with the former Mr. Seeley, and now we get it after the fact most of the time, or all of the time. So where would we interject HEW to help Mr. France, or to alleviate some of the frustrations, the people that filed the complaint, the neighbors or whomever?
Well, the frustrations is going to become the neighbor's issue, because if you don't do it fast enough, of course, it's never fast enough. No matter if I was to get it cleaned up tomorrow, it's never fast enough. But the thing of it is, I don't know how you really want to look at this, but because the way it sounds to me is, before a citation is issued, it sounds like to me that you're possibly wanting me to bring it to the HEW to be heard if there's a citation to be issued. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. If it's not, just let me know. But the longer, it takes longer to do more. No matter what, it takes longer.
I'm worried.
And, pardon?
I'm sorry, Bobby, but to tag on to what you're saying, I'm worried that if we're not careful in trying to set up a process to preserve staff time, we're going to create a process that requires more staff time. Because if you think about it, to go to HEW, then really, if I'm not mistaken, when we go to HEW, it's got to go to the commission. I mean, if HEW makes a decision, it becomes a resolution that goes to the commission. So that means, we've got staff time tied up in preparing for the HEW meeting, reporting at the HEW meeting, and then staff time preparing a resolution, staff time involved in preparing for the commission meeting, and also the time as far as the delay there. I'm wondering if maybe it might be better if it's being just reported to HEW. And the other thing is to make sure everybody understands the way it goes to court is the citation. So there isn't, when he issues a citation, that's when it's going to court. So if he has to have HEW approval, there will be no citation because that is the start of the court process.
I totally hear you, Commissioner Wheeler. I guess I keep asking myself, is there a more effective role that HEW can play in balancing the cost of cleanups with the health of the county within the legal boundaries and inserting that role in a place where it does something? I mean, is there oversight of this just from the mayor versus the commission? I don't know, but I mean, it sort of is the way you're describing now. We're sort of just checking a box after the costs are all incurred. And when I'm looking at this list of deferred items that were sent out in Ms. Wilkinson's memo, I mean, the budget it's pretty extraordinary. So, I mean, does the budget committee alone then provide that check and balance in terms of, how we constrain costs on cleanups? I mean, is that part of the issue that we're trying to root out here? Because, I mean, that certainly seems like something we've been grappling with in our annual budget.
And I think where I see a problem is that HEW needs to be, I guess my thinking on this part of it would be that once, the county attorney and Mr. France have decided to issue the citation and take it to court, when they get to the point of, because a lot of them will get resolved at that point, in the court process, but before we're sitting there with the judgment. But once we have a judgment, then there's a call to be made about how we move forward in enforcing in that situation. And at the same time, if it's a repetitive, before they go to court, they may need to think about, whether they're going to take it to chancery or sessions. But that's probably a decision that ultimately Ms. Wilkinson would be the one to make that decision. But once they get a judgment, as far as how we clean it up, do we pay to clean it up and then just put it on a 20-year track to get paid whenever, or if ever? Or do we put it on a track where we're going to tie it to the taxes and get paid within 2 or 3 years? That's where I think HEW ought to be involved. Either decide we're going to treat them all the same. If that's what everybody wants, then we're going to treat them all the same and have it over with, the decision, or look at it on a case-by-case basis. But that's where HEW, in my opinion, could, and HEW then would need to, it shouldn't be coming to budget for budget to have to say every time we don't have the money. I mean, HEW, we all get the budget every month. You can look at the budget and figure out, well, if we go on this route, we cannot sustain this all year. So we're going to have to pick and choose some of the ones that the county actually pays to clean up, versus that we go to court and say, Judge, we want an order that they clean it up. And if they don't, we want you to order it sold.
Hey, Randy,
Yes.
I just want to share some things, maybe some questions can be answered. it sounds to me like a lot of the legal's being absorbed already from what our county attorney said. So I don't think we have as large an issue, although we do have an issue with expense there, but we don't have a large an issue as we were first discussed. As far as the HEW committee, I was on the chair of the HEW committee the last 2 years and been on the HEW committee for probably 5 years. It's always been informative and just informative information only. I mean, by the time the HEW committee's heard about it, everything's already taken place. The wheels have already been put in motion. Even when Attorney Seeley was here, all that was ever requested of us at any meeting for for cleanups or environmental was, will you approve this cost? I mean, Bobby's always been very good to inform us and bring us pictures and documents and everything on each site. Then Mr. Seeley would come and say, okay, he would back that up on the sites and he would say, okay, here's the court cost to clean this up. Or we've already cleaned it up and this is what we have to recover as far as financially. It was the only decision you had was to be informed. I always questioned why we were asking even making a motion to send it to budget, why it wasn't going directly to budget. Because I've always looked at us receiving that information as just merely being informative because welfare is in the name of our committee, the welfare of the county. It was keeping us abreast of the information. It was keeping us informed. And we would, of course, would send it to budget for consideration because we couldn't fund it as a HEW committee. So we send it to budget for consideration. But I always questioned why it didn't just go to budget immediately. We would be informed and then we automatically directly go to budget to be funded or not to be funded because that's where it needs to wind up anyway. So it's informative to me and it always has been as long as I've been on the county commission, which it needs to be informative to you, but I think that's where it starts and it stops. We don't have a decision there, so it ought to go directly to budget, whether it gets a HEW recommendation or not to go to budget. If it's that far deep in, it needs to be known whether it can be funded or it can't be funded, and that's a budget decision. Now, as far as our taxpayers, I think we need to remember why we serve, okay? We're supposed to be good stewards of the tax dollars, and we're supposed to provide services to the taxpayers, the best services we can possibly provide. Now, this is an issue here, and this is a service that Mr. France provides, or his office provides, that is, it's available to all county taxpayers. The city takes care of their own. We cover a whole lot more mileage in area than the city does. It is an issue that affects multiple taxpayers. When it happens next to you or across the street from you, or when it's a danger in your community, it affects all the taxpayers. And that's something we need to put a priority on, something that affects a wide area of taxpayers. So, we need to do justice by the taxpayers taking care of this office, just like any other office in the county. And we need to do diligence about taking care of these cleanups. We've got cleanups that we're going to have to get new bids on, a multitude of cleanups, because we've let them sit for I don't know how many months, kicking this can down the road about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Are we going to do it? Well, I think we have to do it. So that's not a question. The department has to be there, and this has to be a part of our county cleanup. This cleanup has to be a part of our county duties, in my opinion. So we have to fund it somehow. So I'm tired of kicking the can down the road, I guess, in the HEW when I consider it informative information anyway. Now, as far as Mr. Francis' office goes, I don't know what goes on down there. I've not been down enough times to see or even figure out. But, if you look around our county right now, we've all said in the HEW more than once, all 5 members has said, Mr. France needs help. We've said it for years. This office needs help. This office needs direction. This office needs help inside and outside. We've all agreed with that. We've all promised at one point in time or another that we'd try to provide help. I've heard Chairman Madley say it from the chair. We've all agreed on this, but we're not doing anything about it. We're talking about what we're going to incur to take care of it. And that does need to be looked at. That should be looked at by legal and by budget, in my opinion, and then brought to the floor for the commission to decide, do we spend these dollars on this particular thing or that particular thing, or do we not spend these dollars? You want to put it on the tax roll? You know, I'll entertain that. Whatever wants to be brought before the commission. But like going back to his office, I don't know of any office we have or any office holder we have that doesn't have a staff member in the office or doesn't have people working in the field. Now, if Bobby's going to direct the office, I think it's very reasonable for him to ask for that paralegal, someone to be in that office, to answer those phone calls, to prepare those forms, to do that paperwork, and to take that off him, so he can focus his time in the field. I've been out in the field in some of these places. I know what you run into on my personal job even. I know what you run into and how quickly things can escalate. If it didn't escalate, 2 people in the field that do this job is not unreasonable request at all. If they were both going separate directions, or if they're riding together, 2 people out in the field to do this job is not an unreasonable request to me. So, you know, I think it's time. What I would like to see us do is we need to realize that this is informative to the HEW. We can make changes to where it doesn't need approval in the HEW. We can continue to give it approval in the HEW. We can talk about all this in a separate meeting. Okay? What we need to decide today is how are we going to move forward for the taxpayers? We've still got places out there that's been there 6, 7, 8 months or longer. We got cleanup bids on. We did all I say we, Mr. France got the cleanup bids, he did all the procedural work, and we let it sit where now all that has to be redone. None of that's good anymore. Nobody that we got bids from will honor those bids at this point in time after 6 months' time. So we got to start all over. Now, while these sit and wait, others are growing. Others are being added. We're getting more cases out there we're not addressing because we want to talk about whether we can fund it or not. If you're not going to fund it, then do away with it. But if you're going to have it, we have to fund it. We fund everything else what it costs. We don't sit around and do this for 6 months on anybody else's office. So if we want to keep this office, we need to fund it. I think he needs the staff, and we need to find a way to fund the staff. We need to find a way to fund the office. Now, as far as procedural stuff, I don't think we should be dictating that to anybody's office. We don't tell any other office holder or any other supervisor or director, you do this, you do this, you do this. Everybody runs their own department until there's a problem. And then we address it. As far as, well, Bobby, you ought to probably start looking at the one that's most dangerous and let the other ones fall by the wayside until we get those taken care of. Or you need to start looking at the ones that's going to cost the county the most money. And let's let the others fall by the wayside until we get those taken care of a case at a time and pace ourselves. You know, I think that direction should come from the office. He ought to be allowed to be staffed. He ought to be allowed to set his own procedures and his own guidelines to follow, and he ought to be allowed to do the job properly. It's our job to fund it. It serves the taxpayers well. Not that everything else doesn't, but you know, we're sitting here trying to figure out, it sounds like to me, how we can bare bones this thing with one person. And I don't think that's the proper approach. I think what we ought to do, and I'll put it in form of motion if that's what it takes, that we go ahead and I'll make a motion that we hire 2 people. We hire an office personnel, a person in the field, and we find a way to fund it. That'll start in budget, and it can be handed down to any other committee that it affects for advice or for input or anything we need to do as county commissioners. I think we need to get it on the floor, and we need to let 15 commissioners vote on this instead of my 5 and your 5 and our 10 sitting around and kicking this can down the road, and we never get anywhere. We all have good points. We all make good input, but we never get anywhere. We never accomplish anything. I think it's time, and if it takes that motion to do it, I think it's time that we put this before the commission, 15 members, and if it gets 8 votes for it, then we got to find a way to do it. And if it gets 8 votes against, then we just need to bury it and move past it. But I think we're well past time doing that. So if it's appropriate this time, I'll put that in form of a motion.
Well, the commission has just voted a budget for FY21, which defines this department budgeted at 84,000 some odd dollars. So if you have any suggestions where that money to increase that budget might come from, I think we would certainly entertain that input.
I do not have any suggestions. We increase budgets throughout the year, for all number of matters and things. So I will be happy.
I can't understand what he's saying. How are we gonna pay for it?
I said, I don't know how we'll pay for it, Commissioner Wheeler, but I do know that we increase budgets and we give donations and we fund things after a budget's been passed and put in place all the time. This would just be another hurdle to get over. Maybe we can't get over it. I'm not saying we can fund it. I don't know. I'm saying we ought to address it and move past it. For the good or the bad, we ought to stop kicking this can down the road. I would be happy to come to any meeting you want me to come to as far as trying to help find ways to fund it. You asked me if I had a way. I don't have a way, but I'll be happy to attend meetings. And I think all the other commissioners will be happy to attend meetings too if they're invited. We can all get together and we can work on it together. We find ways to do everything else. I think we can find a way to do this. If we can't find a way to do this, then I don't know. Maybe we don't need this. Is that what we're saying?
I want to ask.
I know a majority of the commissioners, I've heard myself say this office needs help. I've heard them say it for years. We need to get this office help. I've heard more than 8 say, we need to get this office from help. I've heard everybody on you say, we need to get this office for some help. But we're still here, and it's been a long time. So, you know, it's time to give up or put up. And everybody says, every time I bring this up, everybody says, well, how do you want to fund it? How do we fund it? Mitch asked me in a meeting one time, do you want to not fund nonprofits so we can fund this? I told him I'd consider it. I'll be happy to meet. I'll be happy to give my input if anybody wants it. Every other commissioner should too. I'll be happy to try to solve the problem or help solve the problem and do my part. But it's a problem that has to be solved. And I think the only way we solve it is we get it to the floor and we say we're going to do this, and now we got to get out and find a means to do it, or we say no, we're not going to do this with 8 votes, and we can move on past it as a commission. Mr. France can move on past it and do his job as normal as he always has, the best he can. But I don't think we're serving any purpose by these meetings. Constantly talking about the same things and asking the same questions about legal and everything else. The HEW committee needs to be informed what Mr. France is doing, but that's it. We shouldn't be setting his procedures or telling him how to run his office or telling him what to do, which way to do it, when to do it. We should be informed so that our committee knows, so that the commission body knows. The budget needs to be informed because if something has to be funded, they're going to have to, you're going to find a way to fund it. Now, you're going to find a way to fund it with the rest of us as help if you want us included. But this has got to be left alone. You say we do it or we don't do it. If there's going to be change, we wouldn't be here if we weren't going to get change or accomplish change. We wouldn't be discussing this if everything was fine the way it was. So there has to be a change, and there needs to be a change. So my motion is a change. If the commission approves it, we'll have to find a way to do it. If the commission denies it, Mr. France will bury this thing, and Mr. France will move on as normal. I think that's a fair request.
Mr. Williams?
I just want to rehear Danny's motion. Is he, in addition to Bobby France, are you wanting 2 more employees or 1 that's multi-purpose?
I'm motioning 2 more employees, 1 to maintain in the office, 1 to work in the field.
With Bobby France.
Yes, ma'am. And that might not be the right answer. I don't know, but it's an answer that I'm willing to accept, put in the form of a motion. Like I said, Ms. Williams, we need to do something. We can't just continue to have these meetings. If we make a decision to do nothing, then at least we make that decision in the entire body, governing body of the county commission. And I think that's where it has to happen. then we'll do nothing. If that's the will of the governing body, then that's what we'll do. We'll do nothing. We'll move on as is. If the will is to accept the motion, then we'll find a way to do it. And that's all 15 of us. I'm not shouldering budget.
I will second Commissioner Eden's motion, but I'd like to hear it repeated.
Okay. My motion is to allow Mr. Francis' request of the help he needs, both financially and personnel-wise. The request he's made here today, I put in form of a motion to accept those requests to move on to the full commission.
All right, did that clarify it enough for you, Commissioner Williams?
In other words, this department will have 3 employees if it passes. Are we going to just hope for 2?
The request is for 3. Yeah, we currently are budgeted at 1. So are you gonna second that, Commissioner Williams, or?
I'll second it for a matter of discussion, but I frankly feel we ought to try for 1 additional employee and see if we can utilize deputies of the sheriff's department to visit in the field.
Yeah.
Randy, I'm a little confused. Is this a motion for the HEW committee?
I think really from this commission, I mean, from this committee, it really needs to come out as a suggestion back to HEW to consider at their next regular meeting. And if they want to make that motion and move it forward through the committee process to the full commission, I think that would be more appropriate than trying to take a motion out of this joint session. We'll have another HEW committee before the commission in August anyway. I mean, that's my personal opinion on it. I don't know.
Well, that's fine. Maybe we're not a legally operating meeting anyway.
Well, we're legal, but we're not, this isn't an official committee. This is a joint committee meeting to discuss process for, environmental cleanup. So I think, we can certainly take the suggestion out of here. Commissioner Eden makes a lot of really good points. I think, where Budget Committee wound up last year was with requests that far exceeded the budgeted allotment for cleanup amounts. And, the question became, okay, so if we fund all this stuff, then, how do we pay for it? How do we collect it? So I agree with Commissioner Eden completely that, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for HEW to even consider it once it's been through court, the court has authorized the county to go on and clean up the property, and there's an amount set. At that point, it's really just a matter of whether there's money in the budget to cover it or not. And in the cases that have been deferred, there wasn't money in there to cover them. So, I mean, that's sort of where those are. But I think what we're really talking about is, how do we move this process forward in the future, and how would HEW interface with it, prior to that point, if at all, whether it's just a report to as Commissioner Edens had talked about, or whether it was something more interactive that Commissioner Jones was referencing. So one of the things that I'll just say this, as long as we're talking about it, I think we have worked really hard to consolidate all legal service activity in one department or under our county attorney's oversight. And it does not appeal to me to start spreading it back out around the county. So while we've talked about an assistant of some sort to manage the phone calls and the scheduling and maybe get the letters out, which is what Tabitha is doing today, I'd be interested to know what other functions that might be. I don't perceive that as a paralegal function. Once it gets on the court trajectory, I think it really needs to come up into under our legal oversight. That's just my opinion. And then with respect to the field support, I agree 100% that, because I've ridden with Bobby on an occasion or so, and where he goes, maybe not a lot of us might like to be doing that. So having now, whether that requires somebody with him 24/7 while he's out, that I don't know. But and the question is, could we accommodate some of these safety issues for him with sheriff's deputies? We think so, but so far we haven't actually explored that. So I'll just be quiet now. That's just my comments.
Well, if I may, I've been quiet a while, but I've made kind of 4 bullet point notes that I will share. And in many ways, I agree with Commissioner Edens on several points. I certainly disagree on one relative to the process. But one, I think this is an important service to our community. And so I don't think it needs to stop or go away. From my vantage point, this process got way off track at some point. And I think there's 2 reasons why. One, I think the cost started to increase, exponentially, perhaps in large part because of drug use and, crack houses and those sort of things. And the average expense on the cleanup started growing substantially. And so when it came on my radar is when individual cleanups started costing $25,000 and $30,000 and $35,000 more, and far outstripping what had been budgeted. That's one of the ways I think it got off track. 2, we started spending significantly more on legal expenses tied to this. Now, that has been rectified, but at some point, I did a public records request and got information that was hard to decipher the way the billing was done. Our mayor corrected that the last 5 or 6 months that we were getting those bills, but we were spending $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000 on individual cases just in the legal and court costs, funds that the county would never recover. And that was of concern to me. So I think it's a process that is important to the community and needs to continue. I am panicked by the thought of 2 employees rather than 1. When we approved the budget, the conversation about the budget was we would look at and try to work perhaps 1 person and 1 employee in the budget. And the thought of 2 scares me to death. And I do not believe it's realistic. Where I think I disagree with Commissioner Edens is I think that add employees to this process now would not make sense. Now, I agree that it's not for the commissioners, it's not for this group of people to come up with the process. From my vantage point, that should be Mr. France, the mayor, and our legal staff. They need to come up with the process. We already have a foundation. It was provided. It's in the packet. We already have a starting point, but it's broken. It's not working. I think we need we need the process. We don't need to develop a process that needs to come from county staff, but we need the process in place and then build staffing around that. Don't add staffing and then say, well, we'll figure out the process later. Makes no sense. And that makes sense in the county world. It makes no sense in the business world. So I would figure out the process before we add any staff. And certainly that's my position. In terms of the process, something Mr. France said, I wonder if Mr. France said that, well, it's way down the road before we get legal involved. But as I heard Commissioner Wheeler say, and even Mr. France say, a lot of these situations are unique and different. None of them are the same. And so it may be that we need to consult with legal early on to say, here's this situation, what's the best course of action? Maybe it's Sessions Court, maybe it's Chancery Court, but maybe we need to consult legal early to find out the best course of action. And then relative to the collection issue, it sounds to me like that issue has already been resolved. As I read our county attorney's memo, it specifically says that the process that has already been adopted and is in place, or the plan that's already been put in place relative to environmental court in this process says that that shall be collected in the same manner as the county taxes. So with that, I would say that's already been decided. We don't have to vote on it again. And I guess I would close by asking the question, when does that start? Because that's already in place. We didn't have to vote on it last year. We don't have to vote on it again unless we're going to change it, because according to our county attorney, that's the way it should already be happening. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Other comments, Commissioner Wheeler?
I would, it was mentioned by Commissioner Edens that we hire a paralegal. And Bobby, I think I've talked to you enough to understand you think that would be helpful if that person was a paralegal handling that. Is that correct?
It could be a paralegal, it could be administrative assistant. To me, they're more than secretaries.
If
they're on the legal side of things. Say, and the reason I said paralegal was, say for if Teresa wants to take vacation or something and Miss Wilkinson needs help. Well, I'm up to whoever's working for me. If she needs help, so be it. She could help her. She's filling in a void.
Well, my point would be that I don't think it's appropriate to have a paralegal in the county that's not working directly under the county attorney. A paralegal is supposed to have attorney supervision. And I would suggest that if we're going to go that route, that the paralegal be put in the legal department and provide services to the Mr. France. This is really a legal, it's zoning enforcement. It's really legal anyway. But I think that's where we could pick up the support for that part of it. And I think, Mayor, if I understood, there's already somebody that's helping with some of the clerical part of this. Are they also answering the phone now?
Yes.
Okay. And to me, that,
Although I will say that Mr. France indicates that a lot of the calls come to his cell phone direct, but there are a number of calls that come into the office, whether it comes into the mayor's office or whether it comes into that.
Well, and that'll be the same whether it's, if the cell phone number's been given out, that's going to continue no matter where you put that person.
Right.
But that could either be done by the same person you add to, if it's going to be a paralegal and it's under the legal department, it could be there. Or if it's more directly tied to Mr. France, then, you're going to have to shift that phone number where somebody's used to calling the office rather than the cell phone. But I think that's where my problem with how is not whether we, do something with this, it's how we do it. And I think how we do it is important enough to take this time. And to my knowledge, I think this is the first time we've met jointly to try to work this out. But certainly while we need to provide the service to the taxpayer, it's not just a matter of going out behind the courthouse and picking the money off the money tree. We've got to know, one, how we're paying for it, and two, that we're not just throwing money at the problem, that we're actually handling it in a financially responsible way, doing it the best way we can, not just the easiest way we can. And so, I would suggest that we're really, this is, the commission needs to decide, and absolutely all 15 of us need to decide where we put our resources to get the best bang for the county. And to me, there are other needs in the legal department that could also be met, such as when the other paralegal takes a vacation, that it would be better suited if that person were lodged at the legal department. So that's my thought on that part.
Other comments?
I would just,
I didn't.
Commissioner Malone?
Well, just quickly, I didn't get to actually one of my other points. I skipped over it, but when you have limited resources, some prioritization has to be done. And I think it's important to remember, if we increase staffing in this department, which may very well be needed, but it would seem a shame to increase the department and then not spend any money on the actual cleanup. So I think from a budgetary standpoint, we have to keep in mind that we're not just talking about spending more on personnel, we're talking about spending perhaps significantly more on the actual cleanup process. But there's always a finite amount of resources, and when there are, you have to prioritize. That's when, and I think that's what maybe hasn't been going on, is to say, this is a dangerous situation, we've got to clean it up, it has to come first. Here's a situation where the yard just needs to be mowed, it's going to fall further down the list. And so because there's limited funding, some prioritization will have to take place.
Commissioner Jones, yes.
yeah, thank you. I would just, to me, it feels like we have a leaky roof and the water is pouring in, and the suggestion on the table is that we just hire a bunch of more people to clean up the water instead of figuring out how to fix the roof. And to clarify, so I would, when that spreadsheet was up, what struck me was how responsive Mr. France is. If you look at the date of the complaint and the date that he goes to investigate, it's like the same day. It's incredible. I don't think any of us have a concern or a complaint about what a great job Mr. France is doing. In fact, Mr. France, I would argue that you're doing such a good job that it's almost making us feel like you don't need any help. And I don't actually believe that. I'm just saying, way to go. So for me, at least, to feel like the roof is fixed before we start bringing on more people would be very important. And I guess I would want to know that we have the process worked out from A to Z, and I don't need to be part of working out that process. I thought that's what we've been meeting about. We did meet once before this global pandemic started, and that's been a delay for us. But those are important conversations. That is our job, to make sure that government runs efficiently and saves taxpayer dollars. So I won't vote on more people until I know the roof is fixed. I would want to know what the role of HEW would be, because I don't want to sit on that committee, and who knows if I'll even be on it. But just as a rubber stamp, I think it would be perfectly appropriate to get a quarterly report, like Ms. Wilkinson recommended in her memo, as informative, like Commissioner Edens recommended. That's my role. I like it. Let's go with that. But I want to know what my role is so that it's clear, or anyone's role on HEW. And then the third thing I would want to know is that we've got a way to handle the lien and tax issue on the back end, at least as one mechanism for recouping what seems to be an escalating cost of cleaning up all of these properties. So we can't just keep on adding cleanup costs and not finding ways to mitigate that. If that handling the lien through taxes strategy can help us, that's something we need to look at.
Yep. And I think that's is that component of it, do you feel like that we ought to put that in the budget committee's purview for now? Or what's your thought on that?
Yes.
That's one thought, okay. What say Commissioner Malone and Commissioner Wheeler about that? What are you thinking? Yeah, okay, so budget committee will take that, maybe the process piece, HEW can pick up. I agree 100% with Commissioner Wheeler about the legal support, being there. Since I've taken oversight of this particular function for the last 23 days, we have about 15 new cases. That's obviously an average of a little less than one per day that are being investigated. That's certainly manageable with what we're doing at the moment. If that pace changes, and I think it's fair to say that if we wanted to, we could go out and have Mr. France ride around and find properties that he would deem needing some attention. But what we're dealing with is the incoming complaints. I think pretty much right now, averaging a little less than one per day. So, and as Commissioner Jones pointed out, they're being addressed immediately with a site visit, photographs, and follow up with a letter. So, what I don't think we know at this point, and under the management that I'm overseeing at the moment, this was, by the way, under zoning in the past and code compliance, Scott Chapman and his group. I've taken it off of Scott for now, since we're trying to figure out what we're dealing with a little bit and sort of how it works and what we can accomplish before we the judicial system. And so that's where we are. And what we don't know, I guess, in these 23 days is how many of these are going to get cleaned up on their own without having citations or that sort of thing going forward. It's a little early for me to be able to report to you my perspective, what I'm seeing. So, but we do know that in this budget year, at the present time, we have $15,000 budgeted for environmental cleanup, and we have roughly an $84,000 budget line for that work, which includes the $15,000. So if the HEW committee wants to consider additional either staffing or money for cleanups or whatever you might want to consider to move forward to the full commission, then I would expect, I guess, that it would be on next month's agenda. Is that, what's the rest of the joint committee think?
I think I have just a few things to say. I appreciate you bringing that up. I personally would like to see a proposal brought back to the committee to be looked at, since this is your staff and you have kind of led the realm here taking this over. I would like to see a proposal back to us to consider, to send a budget for consideration. I mean, that's just the way I feel like it looks better, and that way we have a proposal to look at in HEW and see the real cost and what to consider, and nobody knows better what Bobby France needs than Bobby France. So I would like to see that proposal come from him. You review it, and since you're leading that department and with Scott, bring that proposal back to the committee to look at. Also, you know, this department has historically been underfunded. In 1998, I was here to vote on this resolution, and we voted for the resolution and put this program in place and voted for $0 for cleanup. It went that way for some time, and as well as you well know, our former mayor did contribute some dollars to this. The commission has done a good job in adding money to the cleanup portion of this, and so that's been a good thing. But I would really like to see you guys come up with a proposal to come back to the HEW committee next month and for us to take a look at and just kind of draw out what Bobby would like to see happen. Am I asking for a wish list? Well, maybe, but are we going to approve everything? I don't know, but I would just like to see a written proposal.
Okay, that's noted. Commissioner Wheeler.
With respect to getting back to cleaning up, which I think may be the kind of the heart of what Commissioner Edens is talking about. I agree with that. But I think part of the problem budget's had is making sure that we're on the same page about how we're going to move forward as far as being able to collect it back. I'd like to ask Ms. Wilkinson if Commissioner Malone mentioned that in the memo, his take from the memo and my take from the memo is we already have a policy in place that we're going to collect these with the property taxes. Is that your understanding too?
I think that in the specific quote that Commissioner Malone referenced is actually within the statute itself, and it does direct the county, and it is a mandate. It says they shall be collected in the same manner. The reason that the trustee was brought into the discussion is there's not a corresponding duty with respect to the constitutional officer of trustee where he's required to make such a collection. But you do have Trustee Story's agreement to do that.
Okay.
So,
and there is nothing that would, in my opinion, and I'd like to know if you agree with this, there is nothing that would prohibit, and perhaps there's no basis to not take the liens that we have now to the trustee and have them collected.
what, when you say collected, are you referring to the issuance of a notice so that people receive that with their tax bill and it has that amount?
That's correct.
Correct. I think that is the appropriate step. And I was on the conference call with Trustee Story to set that up with the software so that could be initiated this October. And with August coming up, that is something that I think steps would want to be taken sooner rather than later in order to ensure that is done.
All right, and I think that helps address a lot of the budget committee's concern about moving forward with cleanups once that's in place and moving, which I think, again, and the staffing issue is just as important, but they really can be treated separately and moving forward both at the same time. But because we don't want to move forward on the staffing and still not be cleaning up, so to move the cleanup portion forward, if we're moving along those lines, I think that helps with respect to the process that we adopt as far as budget's concerned, knowing that that's happening. So I would point that out. And again, that's sort of a separate track from the staffing, but I'd like to see them both moving forward in whatever fashion at the same time.
Let me just ask a question on that. Is it in place to go ahead and begin to assemble the information or ask Trustee Story to begin to assemble the liens that we currently have to be put on the October tax bills? Is that what we're asking? Is there any action required by the commission to get that underway?
My assumption would be no action because it is state policy. Is that your understanding, Ms. Wilkinson?
That's correct. And you have the agreement of the trustee to implement that and to, he's extending that professional courtesy, for lack of a better description, to start.
Okay. And we're well through July, and these really need to be, everything needs to be assembled in September. So that I'll get with Trustee Story today, and we'll begin to see how we can get that moving forward. If it doesn't require any action, we need to get on it so that we get it done.
And if I may, and for the benefit of the commissioners, we have a list which I distributed by email of the liens, the liens and judgments, and that will be the basis for the notices. So that amount that you see in the memo, all of that documentation, we will then confirm that, and those are amounts since 2012. I don't know amounts prior to that, but we will then, in the legal department, prepare those judgments and orders, everything that the trustee will need. But when you're looking for the number, it's in that memo, and it's the amount of liens that were filed since 2012 to now.
All right, since the liens last for 12 years, I think, if I remember correctly, so we need to, I guess, also put in place a check file to re-up liens that are getting close to that date. Is it?
We have Lisa and I have gone through this. Actually, a judgment has 10 years, and so we're looking at that so that each of them has a calendar point after that to renew the judgment. But the lien is filed is in the real property records.
Good deal. All right. That probably takes a lot of the work off of the budget committee, other than figure out how to, maybe fund an expanded department, and to look at whether or not we want to increase the amount of in the budget to support cleanups going through the year. That ought to be a topic of discussion, I guess, next time. I think that's agreeable with budget committee members. I mean, there aren't sources of revenue to fund it are well known, and everyone having spent 4.5 months working through the budget process, we're all well aware of how challenging it was to put it together at its current amount. So think about it. Yes, sir, Mr. Wheeler.
And I would also, I think there is an important point to be made here, that I think it should no longer be just informative, the role that HEW plays in this. We all have to be engaged in dealing with our limited resources. And I think that HEW's now aware that there are multiple ways of doing this in court, some of which do not involve having to go to the budget to find taxpayer money to pay for a cleanup. And I think HEW needs to engage in developing the process to where a decision's being made about whether the taxpayers are going to pay for the cleanup, or whether it's a cleanup that we can go through the chancery court and have the chancellor order it cleaned up by the property owner, and put them in jail if they don't. And if in HEW, I would ask that HEW not just take the role of receiving information and passing it on to the budget committee, but that HEW take an active role in helping develop that process, whether they're making the decision or somebody else is. We need the whole commission to be involved in figuring out how do we do this and not let this become a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year budget item when we have the opportunity to make decisions about different cases and send some of them through chancery court and look to the property owner to pay for it. And then, there's several people you can look at on that list that was on that spreadsheet that absolutely have the wherewithal to clean their own property up. And HEW needs to, decide how we're going to handle that, because otherwise, when it gets to budget, we're looking at a budget that's set for this year. We don't have, and last year and the year before, that we've exceeded, and we either have to, the commission's going to have to decide, yep, we're going to If we have to raise taxes to raise the money, we'll do it. And we'll raise 2 pennies of taxes to pay for that, 500,000 a year, or we're going to have to limit and select which ones we're going to pay for with taxpayer money. And so I would ask you to engage in that part of the process as they look at how we're going to move forward with this. Thank you.
Okay. So Chairman Edens, I guess, is that something that'll hit your agenda for the next meeting?
Yes, sir. You can bring the request to Mr. Prince to get together like it was suggested, and bring a proposal, a request, and he will be happy to address it.
Okay. All right. We sort of worked through the points and a lot of discussion today. Is there anything else we need to bring before the group today? Appreciate everybody's time. A lot on the table, and looks like there's a lot of work to do to get us moving forward. So if nobody else has anything, one more time, going once, going twice.
Mayor.
Yes.
Bobby.
Hey, Bobby.
First of all, I want to thank Ms. Jones for the compliment she made. I do try to get out to the sites as fast as possible. But what you see on that sheet is just call-ins. I'm one person. I try to cover 330 square miles of Washington County by myself. Johnson City has 43.6 miles, and they've got 3 people doing the same job. They've got an administrative assistant, and they also have somebody they answer to. So what you're seeing on that sheet, like I say, it's just people that's called in. There is so much more out in this county to be cleaned up that, I mean, it's more than I could fathom by myself. And if I take a day off, it even gets worse. So there's really not anybody that justifies doing my job when I'm gone. Now, as far as Tabitha goes, love her to death. She only does my postage. I do my own letters. She does answer the phone, but it's usually because somebody's calling in on another line and wanting to talk to me, because I forward the phones to myself. Now, at 3 o'clock when I get off, I turn my phone off, because you won't believe the phone calls I get after 5 o'clock. So I just wanted you all to know that, I mean, I am a one-man show until legal department gets involved. If I can't get the paperwork to them, then they don't have to really worry about it. It's just, I can't do everything by myself.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to have a little process change there. So we'll work on that. Bobby, anything else before we started us off? You wrapped us up. You have anything else you want to add?
The other thing I had to add, and you probably already seen it, was since 2018, the city of Johnson City spent $203,000 from doing demo and yard work, versus from 2012 where I've spent $160,000. So, you know, I'm not saying we're not funding it. We've been funding it as, you know, it came about, but you know, that they've only got a $30,000 budget themselves. So they went over $170,000 just since 2018. And that's all I got to say.
Okay, any comments? Then thank you everyone very much. Appreciate your time this morning, and hope you have a great rest of the day. We are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.